40 Minute Podcast. I'm your host, Ahmed Abdallah, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Dr. Eddie O'Connor. How's everything going today, Doctor?
Oh, it's great. Really appreciate you having me on here. Looking forward to sharing some valuable information.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to jump on. So, Dr. Eddie is a professional speaker, clinical, and sports psychologist who specializes in helping individuals remove barriers to reach their peak performance. With his expertise, he's worked with youth, high school, collegiate, national, international, junior Olympic, and professional athletes, along with performers and musicians. So, today's topic is sports psychology and peak athletic performance. So, I wanted to bring Dr. O'Connor on to talk about his experience in working with athletes, how we can take some of these lessons from sports psychology, apply them to our daily lives, and of course, talk about some famous examples of mental health and the way, mental issues and things like that could get in the way of peak performance. So before we jump into all that, I wanted to ask you, what differentiates sports psychology from standard psychology?
Thank you. Yeah, that's really a great question. There's obviously a lot of overlap. If you want to think about psychology in the most general sense, we all have thoughts and feelings. So when people say, "Oh, I don't have a psychological issue," or it's, I want to kind of keep that separate. Honestly, my belief is that you can't. We are always swimming in our thoughts and feelings. So psychology in the most general sense helps people interact with those thoughts and feelings differently so that you can have your best performance. And psychology traditionally has this pathological view that it's psychology like the study of psychopathology only. And fortunately, in the last couple of decades, or things like positive psychology, et cetera, has grown. And in particular, sports psychology has grown. You might look at it in maybe two ways. I like to think of my clinical psychology background, and I specialize in the things that athletes suffer from the most. So I looked at injury rehabilitation and performance anxiety, for example. So when you get an athlete who's on average, if they're really, really struggling with some severe issues, that's where sort of the clinical sports psychology will come in. The traditional psychology, but understanding that within clinical sports psychology, that athletes have some unique things that they have to deal with. I mean, people are trying to beat them every single day. There's high levels of pressure. As we had said, injury is kind of the norm. So there's several things about the sport context and culture dealing with pressure. Um, Athletes have that where the average person doesn't have it to that degree, in fear of constantly being cut, embarrassing themselves, or being afraid that they're going to disappoint teammates. Lots of unique issues. And then I like to think when an athlete's doing just fine, like, oh, I don't need sports psychology. It's like, well, then we kind of get
Hmm.
into the mental toughness training. And let me tell you, if you want to be in the top 1%, you have to be able to do what 99% of the other people either can't or won't. So there's this psychology of excellence, the psychology of performance that's very unique as well. So that's the other half of what I can do, is that even if you're fine, there's a way to interact with those thoughts and feelings and those everyday pressures to really excel. And there's training that can be done with that.
Hmm.
So that's the difference with sports psychology. It really comes out of psychology, but it's a real specific niche to address the issues that athletes go through the most.
Hmm. And I'm so fascinated by the mental aspect of sports more than anything else because I think, physical talent is pretty common with a lot of people. And I think what differentiates the greats from the all-time greats, from the Hall of Famers, from that, so on and so forth, is the mental aspect, the ability to overcome these mental challenges and, perform in the clutch and things like that. So I definitely want to touch on those topics. But for you, what started this interest in sports psychology and what made you decide to pursue it? Were you an athlete yourself growing up?
I'll say an athlete with quotes, and I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
But one,
Sure,
let me
sure.
let me say that, like, I love that you kind of said that importance, and I want to kind of slow up on that for a second because I think
Please.
everybody gives it a nod, but I don't know that people truly appreciate it. But you can just look out, like, for example, we got the NFL draft coming up, and you see all these amazing first round athletes, and you know how many of them are going to be busts and not work out.
Probably half, if not more, maybe
And then
half.
you get some of them that aren't going to get drafted, and they're going to go to the Hall of Fame. And what's the difference? It's their mental game.
Hmm.
It's their ability to handle the adversity of the NFL and all the challenges that go on. And you're going to see that at every level. Like, you could go back to when you were in high school and you can think about the person that didn't do as much as he could have to succeed, or that she didn't try as hard, or the other one that, like, you really didn't expect, didn't really have a lot of great talent, but because of their tenaciousness really excelled. As I said earlier, you really can't separate out your thoughts and feelings and your attitude from your physical performance. And we're still trying to break out of that to recognize how the mental game, it's not just an extra thing. In fact, after the Cubs won the Super Bowl, after the Cubs won the World Series, they had said, like, if you're not addressing the mental game, you're falling behind nowadays. It's become just as essential to train as it is your strength and conditioning, your position coach, your mobility. So we're really at the place finally where not only is it for the mental training, but now also the mental health. I
Mhm.
want to pause on that too. I love that we're talking
Yeah, I
about
definitely
mental
wanna hear
health.
more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that we're talking more about mental health as opposed to just waiting around until we've got mental illness. Mental health is not the same as mental illness. Mental health means what can I do to be my best with my thinking, my focus, my clarity, my emotions, my joy, my motivation. And there are things that we can actively do to improve this. We don't have to wait for problems. So you hit on that. I wanted to be sure we didn't miss it, but you had asked, how did I get into
Mhm.
this?
Before we jump into that, because
Oh,
you 'cause
sure.
you're bringing up, it becoming a more proactive thing. So, from your experience, how are teams and athletes, I think just in the same way that they're embracing maybe analytics and things like that, how are teams embracing the sports psychology and, again, maybe the proactive approach to mental health versus, fixing somebody that has the yips or some other mental issue?
Yeah, well, let's go at the game's highest levels. Major League Baseball has been fantastic. They have mental training teams now. And actually the athletes themselves are the ones that had to go into the collective bargaining agreement where they said, we want to make this a requirement. You need to provide us. Every team's got a psychologist in the NFL. Same thing. Every team through the NFLPA has got at least one psychologist on staff to refer. And so that's becoming more and more of a thing. Is that all of these major league teams, and it's been around in the Olympics for a few decades, and that staff is even growing. Of just saying, if you want to be your best, we have to have psychology involved for the whole spectrum, for the mental training to handle the normal pressures. And again, if you're out there and you're an athlete or you're a high performer in any area, you should be anxious. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But to
Yep.
handle the normal pressures, but then for the other things, because you're also husbands and wives and you've got family and you've got other things outside maybe of your sport. Like life is going on. There's depression, anxiety, there's stress, there's illness. Like the world is a difficult place. And when I've worked with elite athletes, sometimes I'm talking about the game, but sometimes I'm talking about their boyfriend or girlfriend or what it's like to be traveling or their worry about their contract. Because that stuff shows up on the court if you don't find a way to navigate it and manage it.
Mhm.
So and we're not anywhere near where we need to be. So if there are any administrators out there, I'm like, please put more money and effort into this because it's a win-win. Not only will you be helping the athlete emotionally and as a good human being and health wise. But when they're their best in their health, they're going to be their best in their performance. You don't sacrifice one
Mhm.
for the other. In fact, when you're not investing in the mental game, there's a big risk of people falling behind and not being their best.
Yeah. I
So
think
it's a
that,
win.
like, yeah, in and of itself is a new approach of just you talked about the handling things off the field, off the court, the other things. I think the traditional way of thinking was once they're between those lines, nothing else matters. They're gonna be able to focus and it doesn't matter what's happening in their personal lives. They have to be able to shut that out. And I think we've learned that that's just not the case. Just like they're going to get a bum knee checked out, even if it's not injured, if it's a little bugging them a little bit, they need to get that checked out if they're going to perform. Just like if they have some kind of personal or mental issue, they have to maybe not resolve it, but at least address it and work through it in order to be their best,
Well, I love the
on
tone
the
that you
court.
had said it because that's it. Well, look, they just got to learn how to block that out as if that's something
Hmm.
that's automatic. So even with that attitude, I would say, okay, then how are they going to learn it? Like bring somebody in who can actually teach them to do exactly what you said they need to do because there's nothing natural about being able to block negative thoughts.
Got it.
So
So yeah,
you
they
don't need
they
to get
learn the
that
techniques
annoyance of
and
like,
stuff.
look, they just need to do it. Well, okay, then teach them.
Mm,
Let's coach
yeah.
them. You hear about coaching is effective in sport, isn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. So yeah, let's get back to what interested you in this topic and what made you decide to pursue this.
Okay, so the short story is I was always a psychology nerd. I was interested in Freud, reading analysis of dreams in high school, and it just was fascinated. And I was a runner, and I was very average, best of the worst, worst of the best. But my whole identity was wrapped up as a runner for whatever reason. My senior year, I kept coming across the finish line with this pressure. I was a half miler, wanted to break 2:10. So again, not bad, but not super fast. But for whatever reason, you get those markers that are like really important, and you got to get into that single digits of 209. But all year, I'm running 211, 211, 211, and I'm coming across the finish line, not tired, not exhausted like I should be, and then going over to the bleachers and throwing up as if I was exhausted. And so
Mm,
even at the time, I'm like, what's going on? Like something's weird, but I didn't know. What I did know is that as soon as I crossed the finish line, I was like, ugh, I did it again. Like if I'm not tired, I could run faster. I just need to do it the next time. So let's fast forward. What was going on? Well, I discovered later on as I looked back that my identity as an athlete was so threatened that if I tried and I failed, traditional fear of failure,
mhm,
I would have been emotionally hurt in some way. Now I say that with confusion now because then I thought it would have been like impossible. But I mean, like as you look at it, I'm like, I was still running 211. I was still failing. So it doesn't make sense. And this is the power of why I was so fascinated with psychology. It doesn't make sense. But somehow, by me keeping the hope alive, that if I just did something differently, I didn't really fail. I just made a behavioral mistake. I could be the guy I want to be. I could be the runner I want to be. I just have to do this the next time.
mhm,
And that psychological protection was quite automatic. I didn't do it but on purpose rather. But it was holding me back because I was still running 211 by keeping the hope alive, by not actually testing it. So good
mm.
news. My last race ran a 209. I'm not sure if the coach was a little bit fast on the thumb or not, but I'm going to say that I officially did it. But the question is, if I had learned how to interact with that differently, how would my career have been? If I was able to recognize that my girlfriend still loved me, whether I was running 209 or 211, nothing changed. My parents were completely happy and connected to me no matter what. My teammates, every time I ran 211, were supportive and encouraging. The coach was good. Like, what is it exactly that I was afraid of? Because if I could just see that I was failing and all the things I was afraid of didn't happen, might I have been freed to test it? And then I was a great practice athlete. I ran year round. I mean, coach would compliment me. He actually did say this. It kind of hurt. He just shook his head with me and he goes, "Gosh, if everybody practiced like you, they would just be amazing." And I was like,
The backhanded
What are you
compliment.
saying?" It's like I got the practice part right, but I couldn't deliver on race day.
Mhm,
And it was, I mean, I don't know. Could I have done a 205? Could I have done a 159? My training suggests that maybe I could have. So I immediately, when I was in college, I wanted to do clinical psychology, and I didn't even discover that sports psychology was a thing until the very last class that I took. I was like, "What's
wow,
this? Sports
okay.
psychology?" And I'm like, "Are you telling me there's something I could have done about this over the last 8 years now that my career is over?" Um, and I immediately fell in love with it. And then as where everything took off, I went to graduate school. I still wanted the clinical stuff, as I had said, to specialize in what athletes suffer from the most, but I knew I wanted to do it for athletes. And so sports psychology became my thing. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever retire
Mhm,
because it answers all those questions that I had had. I help people get out of their way. I help normalize all the things that I went through. When I have a lot of athletes, when they're all caught up in that identity and afraid of this, I feel so blessed to be able to help them unhook from that and create that peace so that they can love and enjoy their sports again and play better at the same time.
mhm.
So I'm super
Yeah,
excited.
definitely wanna ask about that journey that you take with an athlete, but I don't wanna oversimplify it, but it sounds like what you were trying to do or what you needed to do was embrace the failure or quote unquote failure as part of the journey and not see it as a failure, but as like a step towards what you were trying to achieve? Is that on the right
Um,
track here?
I had an aha moment and it was way too late. So the conclusion that I came to would be different than how I'd help an athlete work through it. So I would say real short version would be mistakes are what most of my athletes are afraid of, whether they're perfectionistic or, how bad they are. And I like to tell my athletes, I agree with you. Like, I'm not asking you to get more comfortable with failure. I'm not saying that it's okay. I hate that when people say mistakes are okay. If they were okay, we wouldn't be yelled at all the time and doing laps as a result of when we make them. We wouldn't get fired
Sure.
if we've made mistakes on the job. Mistakes are not okay. What mistakes are opportunities to learn. They're information about what went wrong. And this may sound a little bit cliche, but I help my athletes slow down and say, it's a cliche because it's so true. And so few athletes are tying into this. What did I do wrong? So if I was able to, through my story, be able to be like, well, what's going on? If I was aware enough, and that's the other aspect, I wasn't psychologically aware in high school, but if we can get you more aware of what your thoughts and feelings are and how they're making you do things that you don't want to do, I would ask the question, well, is this helping me or hurting me? Not is it right or wrong, not is the threat real or fake, but in the way I'm interacting with it, is it helping me or hurting me? And the data says that I'm actually being hurt. So then why do I want to keep doing this? And it's often
Mhm.
because we're running away from a feeling. So a lot of what I do with my athletes is you're right. I do help them be willing to feel the failure in service of greatness or take that risk in service of achieving their goal. There's a bit of a process with it. But it comes to a skill of developing your ability to jump outside and kind of observe your psychology, keep really close to the values of what you really want, and be willing to pay that emotional price. And when you have that formula put together, that's when you're actually able to take the risks. It's not taking the risk out of it and saying that it'll be okay or saying that there isn't one. It's actually doubling down on respecting what it is, but being willing to go through it, much like you will do in the weight room. The weights are always heavy when you're lifting them. You kind of
Yeah,
wish they'd be lighter, but you're not going to build your strength unless you're lifting the heavy weight. So you lift the heavy weight and you feel the pain in service of your strength. And we do that emotionally as well.
that's an incredible way to put it. Is it's not being okay with it, it's learning from it and going not going around it, not avoiding it, but going through it.
There you go.
So let's talk about the journey that you take with an athlete. So say, you brought on, you have a new patient, an athlete, doesn't matter what sport. What steps do you take to evaluate them to see what their needs are, what areas do they want to work on, things like that. So what's that process like?
Yeah, and in general, it's really a conversation. Many of the athletes that come to me, they kind of know where they're stuck. So I specialize in helping athletes overcome their obstacles to excellence. So a lot of sports psychology professionals will work in different aspects. Some will just do the mental training on that top end where people are fine and they're teaching them mental skills like confidence and goal setting, et cetera. I happen to specialize in getting people unstuck. So they'll usually come in and they'll be able to tell me the story of what's going on. And for almost all of them, it kind of follows what I've already suggested. The idea that there is some level of avoidance or something that they can't get past in their feelings. So with performance anxiety, for example, there's a lot of what if thinking, a lot of overthinking. They're getting really, really trapped in their head. And when they're stuck in their head, they can't be out and performing in their game. So usually session one is often me spent justifying their anxiety and saying, you should be anxious and here's the reasons why, and helping them feel safe in their anxiety and then choosing I've got several strategies, but choosing one of them that will best help them relate to it differently. um, a really quick example would be the fire alarm metaphor that I often use, that
Mhm.
you've probably heard lots of fire alarms. I know that I've never been in a fire. When I've heard a fire alarm, thank goodness, it's
Same.
either been somebody burning bacon or it's the a battery needs to be changed or if at work there's a fire drill. But we would never ignore it, right? If we're doing this podcast and our fire alarms go off in our houses, and I said, hey, look, we got a podcast to finish. Just ignore it. Don't worry about it. It's probably nothing. I don't think either one of us is going to feel pretty good
No.
about that.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
That's what we're telling our athletes to do all the time. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. You're a great athlete. You'll get it the next time. It's a toxic positivity. And as you can tell by my intensity, I can't stand it. It just creates more of a problem. And then athletes feel bad because they can't be positive all the time and they don't have confidence. I'm like, it's a fire alarm. It's your brain telling you you care about this at bat. This is a really good pitcher. It's a full count, or this is for the to advance in the playoffs. Like, of course. So, but if you and I ran out of the room just because a fire alarm went off, your podcast would suffer. there'd be nothing there, and that'd be a shame if there wasn't really a threat. Like I've done this when I worked at the hospital. Was I'd be like, the alarm would go off. I'd check my email and see, oh, okay, people up front said it's just a drill. I don't have to interrupt this session with my client. We can just kind of stay in the room and skip the drill. And now we have to really, really focus. So I have to talk louder over the fire alarm, and you got to lean in and hear what I'm saying. And it's not the best situation. And we both wish the fire alarm wasn't going on, but this is what we need to do. And this is where sport lives because we can't get rid of
Mm,
the fire alarms of anxiety and pressure and negative coaching. But what we can learn to do is be safe in those and then tune into what I like to say the win. What's important now? So for this podcast, it's you and me, and it's our conversation. So whether it be a dog running around or a fire alarm in the background, we would just let those things go, but feel safe to let them run free and choose our attention on what's important now.
mhm.
So that's the super reduced version, but that's the
Yeah, yeah.
formula that I use and with great success. Athletes sometimes after 1 or 2 sessions, just had a football player the other earlier in the season, first half going terrible. They're down by 14 points. He's caught up in his head, but he remembered this lesson that we had talked about, and he just was able to say, "Okay, what am I thinking about? That's the wrong thing." Unhook from it, as I like to call it. What's important now? Got back into the reads. Was able to come back in the second half and win by a touchdown. Mom sent me this long letter being like,
Mhm.
"Thank you so much. We're going to talk to you again soon. Basketball tryouts are coming up."
On to the next one.
Yeah.
Uh, you talked about performance anxiety, and that's something, this whole concept of the yips, which I think is an extreme example of the performance anxiety, where if our listeners are not familiar, it's when someone is unable to do something that is incredibly routine, they've probably done a million times in their lives, but something happens, whether it's a physical or mental trauma, and they're just not able to do that anymore, whether it's shooting a free throw, throwing, for a pitcher throwing to first base, or a catcher throwing the ball back to the pitcher,
Yeah.
very simple things like that. So for example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ben Simmons from the Philadelphia 76ers. He's unable. Something happened during the Atlanta Hawks series a few years back where he just couldn't shoot free throws anymore. How would you approach someone like that, that is unable to do something that he's probably been doing every
Mhm.
day for the last 15 years of his life? How would you start to approach that?
Yeah. And gymnastics too is also called the twisties. So very, very similar.
That was
Um,
Simone Biles, right? A
that's right.
few the last She refused to compete in a few competitions because of that, right?
Right. Because it can be that severe. And so, yeah, so different words for a similar experience. And so the literature on that shows that there could be a number of factors that go into it. For some I've seen, um, was it, there's a Mets player who I believe was able to go back into some childhood issues that were, related with it and showing up. Some talk about this, sometimes a physiological aspect or something that's going on, neuropsychology. But the area and the approach that I do well with and how I've helped people overcome the yips here is again that interaction with from the anxiety perspective. So it's not 100% of the yips this one, but when it's this flavor, the approach that I just described earlier becomes helpful. The idea is that once you kind of get the yip, and this is very similar to panic, you become afraid of the yips coming back. So now that you're like, oh my gosh, and you find that all of your attention is on, I hope this one thing doesn't happen, and you get
Hmm.
into the same situations. And so what I again would help my athletes do is kind of look and identify and kind of see, well, what are the thoughts and feelings that are showing up and how are you interacting with them? And for many people with the yips, not everybody, but many, they find that this is the thing that remains in the forefront. And when I've got that thought in there, it's like a glitch in the system. It interrupts the well-learned stroke. So in golf, for example, you really shouldn't be thinking about the nuances of your 5 iron. You know,
Hmm.
it's like it's a one golf swing, especially at the highest level. So when you have to kind of you're worried about a certain aspect of it, or your mind is kind of adding extra thoughts into this automatic process, it interferes with the execution of the swing. So the idea is again creating safety, because if you're not safe, you're going to pay more attention to those thoughts or those sensations in your body, identifying what was it that was working well beforehand, and how can we get you back into that reprogramming and get that pattern to reestablish itself in your both first conscious and then unconscious mind.
Hmm. And do you take a similar approach for folks coming back from injury? Because you talked about being aware of what's going on in your body and the signals that it's sending, and maybe hyper focusing on the injured area when you're just trying to get back to what you used to do before the injury. So is that a similar approach?
Yeah. Again, you're hitting injury as my other sweet spot outside of the performance anxiety. Similar in the sense of how I like to kind of always ground it down into the idea of, are my thoughts and emotions helping or hurting me? That's way oversimplification, but it looks very different than in each of the situations. So with my athletes, um, first questions that I ask them in my early sessions are like, okay, what are the questions that you have? Because they very often, even though they've been given medical clearance, so let's take the athlete that has gone through rehab, is ready to return to play, but is now afraid of re-injury. And they're getting all the medical assurances that they're able to go back, but they're afraid. Well, then number one, I'm like, I get on their side. I'm like, of course you are. You never thought you could get injured before, and now you did. You just spent an hour rehabbing, or a year rather, rehabbing your ACL. You're going back against the same team that did this to you the first time. you should have all these questions. So let's get them answered. Why are you safe? So I started questioning them. And if they're not able, and most of them aren't able to say it with confidence of what they've heard from the surgeon or the PT or the doctor, then we just write out a long list of questions and say, we got to get this answered from the person that you trust. So why is your knee ready to go? What have you done that proves that it's strong enough? And from once we get that safety in the injured body part, then we can get to the more mental aspects about their confidence and their focus. Again, teaching that is this helping you or hurting you? Because, for example, one quick fix is that we know that if you're going to be thinking about your body part and getting injured, that you're not going to see the opponent coming at you and you're not going to be able to dodge or move. And that's going to actually make it a bigger risk. So by letting that fear of getting injured again go, not only does it help your anxiety, but more importantly, it keeps you safe because you're focused on what's important now,
Mhm.
person in front of you. So you'll see that a lot of these themes that I teach have great applicability across different sport contexts and situations.
It seems like in life too.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to talk maybe more about more of a positive thing. So not coming back from an injury or overcoming the yips, but I want to talk about the clutch gene. So I think about the all-time great clutch athletes in history, Michael Jordan, Derek Jeter. I mean, the list goes on. What is it about these people and their mental approach that separates them from, everyone else?
Yeah, as I've read about them and seen videos and this and that, like if I was going to summarize it into the one thing, I honestly would say it's their relationship with mistakes, where they do a beautiful balance of not accepting them. And this is the part that we all think is mental toughness, like not accepting it, nothing's ever good enough, and driving and the desire to get better, but also with an understanding that they never get crushed by their mistakes. They do learn from each and every one of them. So none of them like the mistake. None of them say that it's okay to make them, but they also don't miss opportunities to learn from it so they can approach and get better. And you've seen that with all the greatest athletes, even as they get older and their physical skills are declining, in some ways they're getting better. Michael didn't keep dunking on everybody. He developed his outside shot and his defense and got better at that over the years. And the other aspect would be their work ethic. I mean, no matter how much talent somebody has, the greatest of the great have just these unbelievable work ethics that you just can't imagine. They sacrifice literally everything to get to that highest level.
Mhm.
So that's something that I work with my athletes as it goes on. Almost every athlete, no matter the level, it's helping them find that if they want to continue to get better, where can they pull from and give more? Is it more pain that they're willing to endure, pushing themselves harder? Is it, more investing more in the mental game or nutrition or their sleep, more time, more coaching? Do they get a higher level coach or a higher like there's always ways to pull from it. Uh, I'm a big Buffalo Bills fan, so
Mhm.
I don't like to push up Tom Brady too much because he tortured my team for decades. But
Sure, sure.
you got to respect the guy. I mean, you have to. And I heard this story about he was at a golf tournament, for charity during some summer or something else like that. And he's running sprints in the parking lot and doing some other drills. And some other players are like, "Hey, Tom, what are you doing?" And he responds and he goes, "I'm trying to win a Super Bowl." And like
I think I was gonna bring that up actually
is that
as
right?
another
Okay.
example. Yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't know, like,
Um,
sometimes I'm like, are these like, like Batman stories, like they're just like urban legends, or do these things really happen? So, but it's like, and you see that, and you know about Kobe too, that he'd get there, he'd work out before anybody would be there, then go back into his car and nap and wait for Phil Jackson to knock on and be like, okay, let's go to practice, and
yeah.
like that's what it takes to be the ultimate best. And so,
Mhm.
how much are you willing to invest in your outcome? Um, there's a work ethic that's really
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah, I mean, Kobe would be there at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, do shoot around, all that stuff, like you said, work out, and yeah, the not that specific Tom Brady story, but I would hear that he's on vacation with his family and he's bringing his personal trainer with him, and they're doing drills on the beach, and he's doing all his rubber band exercises and all that stuff, and a lot of people do the hashtag no days off, but I think some people really take that seriously
Yeah.
and take it to heart, and I think that that's the mental toughness, right? Is being able to do the same thing every day over and over and not being, fatigued by it, not being bored of it because you know that the end goal is
Well, I'm going to challenge
oh,
you on a couple things.
oh, please.
Can be bored about it. You can be fatigued by it, but how?
Okay.
And because we can't control our emotions. but you still do it anyway. That's one of the skills
Okay.
that I teach, is that it's not about emotional control. Because if you only wait until you're motivated, we're all gonna fail. I
Mm,
know that all athletes at the highest levels are doing things that they don't wanna do, and they're doing it because they
okay.
know that that's what's gonna help them succeed. And the other thing is I wanna be careful about the grind. It does, and even Kobe had said that he didn't sleep very much, but then he had said that when he learned that that wasn't helping him, he got more sleep. So I want to caution people out there that, like, you see the hard work and all the things that Brady or whoever else is doing, that it's work, 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 work. But part of that work is recovery.
Mhm,
There's tons of literature and research on it that if you're sleeping 8, 9, 10 hours a night, it's going to enhance the recovery that you've done during the day, and you're going to be stronger and faster and make better decisions. So please don't think that it's grinding yourself into the ground until there's nothing left. Part of that grind includes science informed recovery, sleep, nutrition, and things of that nature. And you'll see that Brady, for example, was very strict about his diet, his sleep routine, and a lot of those exercises that he was doing was recovery so that he could play well into his 40s at that high level. So
mhm.
I'm going to say it one more time, please be careful about the grind idea. It's not
Yeah,
running yourself into the ground. That doesn't help anybody.
okay. Yeah, I think of Brady and LeBron as the 2 best examples of that approach where I mean, there's reports that LeBron spends, a few $1,000,000 a year on
Yeah.
his body in terms of, recovery, massages, the food, all that stuff just to make sure that for all the work that he's doing, he's probably doing just as much or more recovery. Uh, So we've talked a lot about sports psychology and all the goats in all the different sports and what sets them apart. So for the regular Joe, that's, a weekend warrior or someone that's, trying to stay in shape, playing in a flag football league or something like that, or just a regular guy like me, just a dad. And, so how do we take these lessons from sports psychology and apply them to our regular daily lives?
I like to say that it's the athletic mindset. It's just the context that's different. So I have worked with musicians, artists, performing artists, actors, actresses. And it's the very same thing because if you want to do really well in something, if you want to run a 5K, I've applied this actually to populations of obesity and chronic pain. You want your marriage to be better, you want to be more spiritual, and whatever it is that you want to do, there's going to be thoughts and feelings that get in the way. And so when you adopt this attitude of what we call psychological flexibility, the ability to kind of stay really in touch with your goals and values, and then hold on a little bit more lightly to what you're thinking about and feeling, and be able to interact with them in a way that helps you take committed action towards those values and goals. That's really the formula. You do it by very much developing a present moment focus, and again that lightness of being able to learn how to observe, and get a little bit of distance from the automatic thoughts and feelings that aren't always helpful. Being able to choose your response, and you really need that, again, very clear picture of who it is that you want to be, and then developing that willingness to do those things with those difficult thoughts and feelings in service of achieving it. And
Oh,
that
2
applies to everybody.
follow-ups there. Sorry, the present moment focus. Could you expand a little bit on that, on what that is?
Yeah, so very often we are stuck in the past, whether it's like, I made that mistake, I don't want that bad thing to happen, or we develop this narrative of who we are based on our experiences. And I'm not saying that the past is a bad thing. We need to learn from it. Review the film and learn from your mistakes. But sometimes we get caught up in that. Sometimes we get caught up in the future. This is particularly with the anxiety. How am I going to make the team? What's going to happen next? What's my future going to be? And again, we should plan on that. You got to plan for retirement. Game plan for the next opponent. But our performance is ultimately right here, right now. No matter what I've got going on in the future or whatever happened to me in the past, nothing matters more as I'm performing than my ability to tune in right here and now. So, this podcast, for example, I could be worried about mistakes that I made in the past, or I could be worried about the next appointment that I have. And if I'm going to go into either one of those, I'm not going to be able to tune in and be my best self and answer your questions and have this great dialogue. If the moment requires us planning for our futures, well, then that's in the present moment. I'm planning, and that's the
Sure.
goal. It's okay. But ultimately, what our mind is built to do is often go to the past and the future, and so we have to develop this skill. Often through mindfulness training is a way to do it. But how do I bring my attention back to right here and right now, and start to learn that my mind is evaluating or being a commentator? A colleague of mine had put it this way: "Are you the play-by-play guy or the commentator?" Because the play-by-play guy tells you what's happening on this down or on this play, and is just very, very descriptive. And that's the guy we want to kind of listen to as we're performing in the moment. The commentator can talk about all this other stuff, but we kind of look at those two parts of our mind and say which one is talking. And we can listen to the commentator when it's helpful, but when he's unhelpful, we just want to turn down that volume and stick with the play by play guy.
Mhm.
That's how we can improve our performances in the moment.
So, what are some a few practical tips that someone listening to this can apply right away, maybe to work on that, to exercise that muscle, or just to focus on goals and things like that? What are some easy
Yeah.
practical tips here?
The first one that I would say is to hold on to your thoughts and feelings lightly. That's easier said than done. I'll give you a resource here at the end about how to do that better. But the first one is to kind of recognize that your mind has a mind of its own and that it can't always be trusted. The second big thing would be that what's important now. If you can really dial in, and I ask myself this question 20 times a day, if I'm getting distracted, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, okay, wait, what's important now? And then it'll reorient my attention, and then recognize that you can choose your attention. Some people are like, well, gosh, how do I do this? Da, da, da. I'm like, for a lot of people, it's just actually making the choice. You do have an automatic mind, but whether you're ruminating or staying in it, just recognize that you already possess the power to let go of that and put your attention where you want it. Now, you may have to do it over and over again, but just knowing that you have a choice can be very helpful. I'd start off with those three. Oh, number four, get your sleep. As I said earlier, we are a sleep deprived group very often. That'll help you more than anything. Put that at the top of the list and then do the other three.
Okay. Okay. I love it. All right. So where can people learn more about you, about your approach, and about some of these other things that they can do to, reach peak athletic performance, but in their daily lives?
Yeah, super excited. I've got some free resources for you on my website, dreddieoconnor.com, DREDDIEOCONNOR.com. The first is I've got a link to my Mental Toughness in 60 Seconds video series on YouTube, so you can catch that link. But what I'd really love for you is this free training that I have called What to Do When Positive Thinking Doesn't Work. You heard me freak out earlier about how we're always trying to be positive and have to feel confident so that we can play better. And that's simply not true. Again, if I'm going to send somebody to the Olympics, how am I supposed to tell them to just be optimistic? It doesn't make sense.
You use that phrase toxic positivity. I'm not super familiar with that.
Yeah, it's in the idea that toxic in the sense that sometimes by just trying to be positive when I can't be positive. Like for example, we talked about those injured athletes. If you've got an injured athlete and you're just trying to tell them to be positive about it, that's going to really invalidate their feelings and cause them to struggle even more. There's like we
Hmm.
want to be able to lean into the difficulties, and that's what this training is about. Again, it's a quick training. It's free for you, called What to Do When Positive Thinking Doesn't Work, and it really teaches this skill of being able to unhook and look at your thoughts and feelings differently and be able to choose the ones that are going to help you more. Invest in those, but you don't have to be positive about it. You have to be a little bit more realistic. And as I said,
Hmm.
listen to that play by play guy, and that training will help you do that. Again, it's free on my website, dreddieoconnor.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Doctor. This was a pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm sure anyone listening or watching will learn a ton from you. So thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, lots of fun. Best wishes to everybody out there.